Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first lecture for History of the English Language. What we're going to do in this lecture is just give you a bit of a basic background of what this class is going to entail. So, let's begin. Before we begin, I want to specify that this is not a typical history course, okay? We're looking at the history of a language, so we won't have the same chronological or geographical markers that a typical history course will have. We're looking at English, its spread, and its effect on culture over an extended period of time. We're going to look at the significant changes the language experienced over time, and we're going to have two foundational bases for the class. Okay, it's going to be cultural study and linguistics. Those are kind of the two topics that are going to drive our study. And we're going to talk a little bit about both of them now. When I say linguistics, I don't want you to be afraid, right? However, think of this course as kind of a very, very basic introduction to linguistics. For those of you who are unfamiliar with linguistics, it is the scientific study of language and its structure, including the study of morphology, syntax, phonetics, and semantics. Specific branches of linguistics include sociolinguistics, dialectology, psycholinguistics, and more. We cannot begin to understand how language changes without understanding the underlying principles. Okay? When questioning how linguistics fits into a class called History of the English Language, well, you have to note that it's kind of an unusual field for English. Definitely not my favorite when I was an undergrad, but I took it. Linguistics is more scientific and more mathematical than typical English. Okay? Some key categories that we'll use to examine language in this course, and these categories we draw from linguistic studies, are morphology, syntax, phonetics, semantics, grammar, vocabulary, and accent. Now, grammar, vocabulary, and accent are the most familiar to us, right? Grammar is the methods of the construction of speech and its acceptable usage. Vocabulary, the terms we use in communicating. And accent, the way it sounds when we say something. Those terms we know. The other four are kind of new to us. Okay. Morphology is the study of words, how they're formed, and their relationship to other words in the same language. It analyzes the structure of the words and parts of the words, such as root words, prefixes, and suffixes. Right? The smallest unit of analysis in morphology is the morpheme. And the morpheme is a meaningful unit of language that cannot be further divided. And it's not necessarily syllabic. Syntax, here, is the arrangement of words and phrases to convey meaning. Okay? Phonetics, here, is the study and classification of speech sounds. Phonology is the study of the system of relationships among speech sounds in a language. The smallest meaningful unit in phonetics or phonology is the phoneme. Here. Okay, the phoneme is a distinctive sound that makes a difference in the meaning of a word. So, for example, the words pit, pet, pat, and put are pronounced identically except for one sound, that central vowel sound. And it's that central vowel sound that creates the difference, and that's the phoneme. Okay? The I, the ah, the Okay? And then we have semantics. And semantics is the study of meaning in a language's vocabulary or lexicon and its constructions. Okay, but don't worry about that now. We're going to see these terms again. You're going to become very familiar with them throughout the next 16 weeks. All right, so I said that we had two kind of foundational bases. One is linguistics, the other is cultural study. Okay? What can we learn about a culture and its people is based on the artifacts, like language, that they left behind. Okay? We know what we know about ancient cultures partially because of their language. So, the study of English is the study of culture. And in that sense, the story of English is the story of movement. It grows and it changes based on its cultural context zones, political and economic factors, and technological innovations. Okay? How does that fit in? Well, that means we're going to treat language as a cultural artifact, because it is. We're going to approach literature through a new lens. We're going to attempt to understand the ramifications of language change. And we're going to consider how we fit into the current dynamic order. Okay? So let's talk nuts and bolts. Okay, so the question that's going to guide us this semester is, how did we get here? Okay? If we're going to be studying English literature, English language, and English culture, which most of you are, it's helpful to have a firm grasp on its history. Okay, so when I ask, how did we get here? I'm asking, what's the history? Okay, that said, we're going to be looking at the development of language, specifically English, from its earliest traceable beginnings. And for that, we're looking at about 3,500, 2,500 BCE to now. Okay? We're going to be looking at Indo-European languages, and Indo-European languages are considered the extreme linguistic ancestor to English. Okay, it might not look like the English we know, but it is kind of a forecursor to the English that we know. We're going to look at those to help provide a sturdy historical linguistic basis. Okay, but ultimately, our emphasis is really going to be on the Old English period, so we're talking about 449 BCE to now. All right, but more than that, we won't just focus on England and America, but rather we will consider the spread of English across the globe and examine how the language changes based on its cultural context. Okay? We're going to talk about historical events and attitudes, and we're going to examine specifically how they relate to English. Okay? We're going to examine language, again, like I said before, as a historical artifact, which means we're going to consider all forms of communication. So we're going to look at written, we're going to look at oral, we're going to look at translations, okay? And then we're going to go from basic communication to literary endeavors. So we're going to be looking at all of that in our study, right? The timeline, global, literature, basic communication, all of that in our study of English language. The last thing I kind of want to leave you with are two quotes from Albert Seabaugh and Thomas Cable. They were two English professors who spent a large portion of their lives studying the English language. And in fact, their book, A History of the English Language, was going to be the book for this class, but I felt it was very dense, right? I had to read a few chapters more than once just to understand what they were saying, right? But I do encourage you, if you're really interested in them or in this course and in the history of the English language, their book is actually a really, really, really good resource. But they spent a large portion of their lives studying the English language, and they did a pretty good job of describing what the history of English language is and why we should study it. And I want to leave you with 2 quotes from them. The first is this: "The history of English is a story of cultures in contact during the past 1500 years. It understates matters to say that political, economic, and social forces influence a language. The history of a language is intimately bound up with the history of the peoples who speak it." Second quote: "In numbers of speakers, as well as in its uses for international communication and in other less quantifiable measures, English is one of the most important languages of the world." Okay, I just want to leave you with those 2 quotes as we begin our journey into the history of English language. As always, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please, please, please email me, and I hope you all have a great day.